right, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Supporting the Economic Integration of English Learners, the first in a series of 3 webinars focused on the pillars of economic integration, civic integration, and linguistic integration. My name is Jessie Stad, and I'm the project director for the Enhancing Access for Refugees and New Americans project. Go ahead to the next slide. So today we're going to talk briefly about what immigrant integration is, and then explore one of the 3 pillars, economic integration, in more detail. We'll hear from 3 presenters who have all taken different approaches to supporting the economic integration of English learners in their states and programs. Next slide. So this project is a national initiative of the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, or OCTE. The project launched in the summer of 2021 and is expected to close in the summer of 2024. And the project has a series of web pages available on Links, which we'll talk more about those web pages later. Links, which is also funded by OCTE, houses a resource collection, a vibrant community of practice, online courses, and resources from projects that also support the adult education system. Next slide. So EARN aims to provide adult education state staff, local program staff, and instructors who are offering integrated English literacy and civics education, or IELCE, activities with resources and technical assistance to help them apply an immigrant integration and inclusion lens to support learners' linguistic, economic, and civic integration. Go ahead to the next slide. So let's dive into what immigrant integration is. What is this? So immigrant integration is a concept, go ahead to the next slide, that can be understood as the process of economic mobility and social inclusion for newcomers. Other definitions specifically note the two-way implications of immigrant integration, a dynamic two-way process in which immigrants and the receiving society can work together to build secure, vibrant, and cohesive communities. Both of these definitions point to the need for strategies that go beyond solely providing education in order for immigrants to function effectively in the United States. IELCE activities provide an entry point for adult educators to engage in intentional immigrant integration efforts, provide improved services to refugees and new Americans, and still maintain programming that meets statutory requirements. This aligns with the Executive Order 14012, which calls upon the United States to be a nation of opportunity and of welcome by ensuring that our laws and policies encourage full participation by immigrants, including refugees, in our civic life. And for those who would like to learn more about economic integration, we'll put a link in the chat to a short video that explores the role of immigrant integration in adult education. Next slide. So through EARN, we have taken this concept of immigrant integration and developed the IELCE Immigrant Integration Framework, which shows the alignments between the legislative programmatic requirements of IELCE and IET and aligns them with services that support immigrant integration, This framework is also available on our website if you are interested in taking a closer look at it. Go ahead to the next slide. So as I mentioned, this is the first of 3 webinars, each focused on one of the pillars of economic integration. Next week, we'll discuss civic integration, and the week after that, we'll discuss linguistic integration, and we hope that you'll be able to join us for those as well. So on the next slide, we're going to put a link to the chat to a Jamboard. If you're familiar with Jamboard, it's basically a crowdsourcing tool. And so at any point during today's webinar, or even afterwards, we would love it if you would share any resources that you've used to support the economic integration of English learners. The Jamboard is a resource that will continue to be available to anybody who is on this webinar or has the link. So please don't be shy in sharing resources that you think might be helpful to your peers. We've also pre-populated it with some of the things that the EARN project has to offer as well. So go ahead to the next slide. I'm now going to turn this over to Dominic McParlin from the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education to provide some perspective on the federal landscape of supporting the integration of new Americans. Dominic?
Thank you, Jessie, and good afternoon or good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today and for your new or continued interest in utilizing an immigrant integration approach to support English learners in adult education and IELCE activities. Jesse just kind of went over some of the various definitions of immigrant integration, and just to kind of give you a perspective of, our understanding at the federal level of what this means, and kind of the mandate that we have to kind of work in this space. So as Jesse pointed to, the purpose of the IELC program is to enable adult English learners to achieve competency in English language and acquire the basic and more advanced skills needed to function effectively as parents, workers, and citizens of the United States. So that requirement, coupled with the programmatic components of English literacy, civics, and workplace, align perfectly with the 3 pillars of immigrant integration. Hence kind of the webinar series that we are doing right now to really kind of reinforce the connection between IELCE and immigrant integration, and how you could support new Americans' access and inclusion for them while meeting the requirements of the IELCE program. But beyond that, just the general Adult Education and Family Literacy Act that we work under, one of the purposes of the program is to assist immigrants and other individuals who are English language learners in acquiring an understanding of the American system of government, individual freedoms, and the rights and responsibilities of citizenship, right? So we kind of have a mandate from the AFLA statute as well as the requirements of IELCE. So much of the work we've been doing through the EARN project is to help us shift that pendulum back from more just kind of workforce and or just English language and civics to finding a nice middle ground where we're able to more holistically support our new Americans in our classrooms. In addition to that, when the president first came into office, one of the first things he did was sign Executive Order 14012, which directed the White House Domestic Policy Council to reconvene the Task Force on New Americans to coordinate the federal government's efforts to welcome and support immigrants, including refugees, and to catalyze state and local integration and inclusion efforts. The task force is comprised of a broad range of federal agencies, obviously including the Department of Education, working on 5 areas of focus, which are language learning and access, health and well-being, workforce development and training, financial access and education, and then data and research as well. From our perspective, we have been fortunate to get adult education a seat at the table, and we have actually been co-chairing the Workforce Development and Training Committee and participating on all of the committees. So the work you all and we are doing at the federal level has been, we've had the chance to really kind of spotlight and elevate this program and our efforts in this space through the Task Force on New Americans. There will be a report hopefully coming out in September with various action items, and I would not be surprised if we don't see IELCE and our work we're doing here with EARN as promising practices. So we're both following the mandates from the federal government, but then also kind of trying to push the field in this direction as well, because we know that in order to fully serve immigrants, refugees, and other new Americans, we have to take a more holistic approach that serves the entire learner, not just individual components of it. So the other component of the Executive Order 14012 is a naturalization working group. And the executive order is, the purpose of this was to bring together, again, a group of federal agencies to promote and advance naturalization for eligible individuals. And OCTAE is working with the task force and the naturalization working group to strengthen integration and inclusion efforts for new Americans. Because as the executive order says, consistent with our character as a nation of opportunity and welcome, it's essential to ensure that our laws and policies encourage full participation by immigrants, including refugees, in our civic life. So that is kind of where we are coming from here in this effort. So through the EARN project, through our work with the task force, through the naturalization working group, we are working to advance immigrant integration. And kind of one thing to look forward, So actually, next slide. Thanks. So that's kind of us here. But as I just mentioned, from the Task Force and Naturalization Working Group, there are many federal agencies that come together to support integration and inclusion for new Americans. And we in the United States are a little unique in that we don't have a single office or agency that is tasked with this, but rather it is a diverse group of federal agencies that come together to support these components of immigrant integration and inclusion. So you can see here that the agencies that are involved with pre-arrival and the actual immigration process. And then there's agencies including OCTAE that is involved with the integration and inclusion aspect for linguistic, economic, and civic integration, as well as the process of naturalization, where we help eligible individuals become US citizens. So one of the great things about the task force and the naturalization working group is it's really kind of helped us break down some of these silos that the federal government often faces in terms of collaboration. And now and moving forward, there's a great effort to have a more cohesive, coherent, and unified support system for immigrant integration and inclusion. So you could dig deeper into this, but just to kind of give you one example of how this is all kind of coming together. From the work of the task force and the naturalization working group, OCTAE is very excited to be one of the primary partners with the White House and USCIS to develop the first and inaugural National Immigrant Integration and Citizenship Education Conference. This inaugural conference theme is the road to access and inclusion. So very much tying into the work we're talking about here today. So the USCIS, in partnership with the White House Task Force on New Americans and Interagency Naturalization Working Group, is bringing together professionals with equities in immigrant integration and citizenship education from both the public and private sectors to help us and understand immigrant integration and indicators. What are we talking about here? Address barriers to integration and identify gaps in access, and then developing strategies that will better build a road for full inclusion of integration of newcomers. So this will kind of be the first step after the report comes out to kind of highlight and unpack some of the action items and efforts that will stem from our work on the task force. This will, if you're interested, it's going to be held here in Washington, D.C. It is free. You just have to find yourself a place to stay. And it'll be on October 17th and 18th in the DC area with more information to come. So again, we at OCTAE are kind of, we started this before the task force started, so it's great to be kind of ahead of the game, but also to see and recognize at the federal level, the federal government is taking this as an important issue across the federal government. So with that, I think, again, thank you all for coming, and I'll turn things back over to Jesse. Thanks.
Thanks, Dominic. So now that we have reviewed immigrant integration and how it's supported at the federal level, let's dive into the focus of today's webinar, economic integration. So go ahead to the next slide. So what is it? There is no real legislative definition, a formal definition of economic integration in WIOA, in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. But WIOA charges us as adult educators to provide education services that enable English learners to acquire the basic and more advanced skills needed to function effectively as parents, workers, and citizens. So we are broadly defining economic integration of English learners as the skills needed to function effectively as workers and participants in our economy. So that's a pretty broad charge. So we would love to hear from you about why it might be important for adult ed programs to support the economic integration of your English learners. So take a minute, put some ideas in the chat, and we'll see what thoughts you have. Thanks. Barrier removal. Yes. Economic integration removes barriers. Absolutely. Contribute to the overall economy, quality of life, interest in better jobs, their contributions to a better workforce, being financially able to navigate the financial systems in the US. Absolutely. Noting that systems work differently country to country. Absolutely. Even within our country, they work differently depending on where you are. Just that it's a critical part of integration, helping English learners becoming contributing members of their community. We owe it to them as individuals with dignity. Love that. Helping learners to access quality jobs, not just any job, equity and access, cultural and educational diversity, helps new immigrants be self-sustaining. Love that. This is great. Keep it going. I'm going to share a couple of ideas that really resonate with what you've already said here in the chat. So go ahead to the next slide, John. So there's a lot of crossover in what I'm about to share with what you've written, but as you can tell, there's a lot of reasons why it's important that we support the economic integration of our learners. And there are a lot of things that we as adult educators can do, starting with some very obvious things to help support the economic integration of our learners. So very obviously, preparing learners for workforce training programs, which can include IET programs. We have talked a lot through EARN about different state models for how IELCE and IET are run, in combination with each other when that's appropriate. In some states, those states allow IELCE activities to serve as bridges to IET, as one way of interpreting WEO's directive to deliver IELCE in combination with IET. So in situations like that, IELCE activities can help prepare students for an IET through specialized English language acquisition and other specific content and activities, and are therefore helping them towards that goal of economic integration through preparing for a workforce training program that can help them get a better job. IELCE activities themselves can also include a workforce component directly, not just as a part of an IET program, because we know that economic integration is not a goal that our English learners can afford to wait to make progress towards. If an IET is a next step, you still need some workforce skills maybe today to get a job that you need for survival or for self-sufficiency. Another thing that we can do in all of our instruction, but explicitly in IET programs, is to include workforce preparation activities into instruction. Workforce preparation activities include a range of things that you may already be including in instruction. Workforce preparation activities can prepare immigrants and English learners for post-secondary ed, job training, and employment through promoting critical thinking, digital literacy, and other really navigation skills, other things that they're going to need just to not only to be successful in employment, but probably also in their regular life. We can also provide assistance in helping learners prepare for, find, or maintain jobs. One of the ways that we often see adult education playing a role in this space, since job placement is not often the role of adult educators, is through providing career exploration or career readiness activities. And these can include learning about different occupations, exploring one's own skills and interests, visits to job sites, bringing in guest speakers or employers from different career fields. Some programs include support on resume building or interview preparation or other activities directly related to helping students find jobs. And last but not least, and I saw this in the responses in the chat, is about helping our students navigate our systems as part of our charge as adult educators. And this can include navigating work systems like submitting online job applications, but also the types of systems that are needed just to operate in our economy. So things like setting up a bank account or using payment apps, understanding lease agreements. These things are often covered in English language acquisition classes, sometimes initiated by an instructor as part of sort of a curriculum, but often just because a learner needs assistance and the teacher's there to step in to provide supports. So we would love to hear from you again. We're going to pull up a poll. And this poll is, we're just trying to hear about what are some of the economic integration activities either you or your program has already supported, because we suspect that you're probably doing a lot of this already. You may not have have put it in the lens of economic integration, but please go ahead and answer this poll. You can answer more than one. So we'll give you another 15 seconds or so. I'm reading these comments in the chat. These are great. Taking students to a public library and looking at resources. Yes. Basic life skills, being able to read for themselves documents, especially for immigration. Yes, these are all great comments. Thank you. The 2-gen focus, economic integration of adults positively impacts children. Yep, it's all great. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So hopefully you can see that. This is awesome. So 70% of you are already involved in some way in the delivery of workforce training, whether it's an IET or something else. 64% work to prepare our learners for workforce training, which may be an IET, maybe something else. 86% are assisting learners in preparing for finding or maintaining jobs. That's incredible. So that's a huge number. 46% are assisting learners in navigating the financial systems here in the US. And then, I see that the others adding in the chat, thank you. Explanation of employer benefits, digital literacy classes, taking students to the public library, preparing them for job interviews, building effective resumes, visiting the town manager's office and getting a tour of town hall, field trips to the local community college, transferable skills. This is great. Thank you. Okay, so now that you've heard a little bit about what broadly economic integration activities can look like, and clearly you're already doing them, we have a panel of presenters who are here to share a little bit more about how they're doing it in their states in some very discrete ways. So I'm very pleased to introduce 3 panelists. Doug Weimer is the supervisor of adult instructional services in the Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning at the Maryland Department of Labor. He provides oversight and support to the state team that monitors Title II adult ed funding in Maryland. Lynn Seifert is the program director for adult education across Middle Tennessee, which includes Nashville, which is the biggest city in Tennessee. And Derek Couchenbrenner is an educational specialist in the Adult and Community Learning Services Unit at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. He provides technical assistance to adult education agencies and oversees college and career readiness initiatives. Prior to joining the department, he worked in the field of workforce development, managing adult ed, workplace ed, and job training programs. So we're going to hear from Doug, Lynn, and Derek about the activities that they're conducting in their states or programs. And we're going to kick it off with Doug. While he's speaking, please feel free to put questions either in the Q&A or in the chat. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end of the presentations to address questions. So please feel free to put them in the chat. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Doug.
Okay, hello everyone. As she said, my name is Doug Weimer. I'm with the Maryland Department of Labor, and I want to take a few minutes to talk about the Career Pathways Connections for Adult Learners program that Maryland undertook a few years ago. So next slide. So this probably is not a unique challenge for Maryland, but in Maryland at the state level, WIOA Titles 1, 2, and 3 are all under the oversight of the Maryland Department of Labor. So that means that Title II, the adult education funding, has oversight from Maryland Labor, as well as the work of a lot of our American Job Centers. So Title I, adult youth dislocated worker, as well as a Wagner-Pizer program at the state level are all co-located, which is great. We have about 25,000 adult education students annually in our Title II programs in Maryland, and our Title I programs offer employment and training services that are well aligned with the career goals of our Title II participants. But despite all of that, we find that co-enrollment between Title I and Title II across Maryland and all of our local jurisdictions is historically low. We have a continuing problem with making sure that there are clients that are accessing Title I services that are being referred to Title II, and also those that are in Title II adult education that need career services, job placement, et cetera, that they're also accessing the Title I services. Now, there's definitely some reasons why this is a challenge. We know that in some cases, adult learner academic levels are sometimes too low to enter workforce training. So we know that it's kind of a timing issue. Maybe people at the low end of our instruction that just aren't ready for workforce training. But also there's a time commitment of training courses. So if someone's already balancing adult education courses, job, family life, they don't necessarily have the time for training courses as well. There's also different eligibility requirements between someone enrolling in Title II adult education in Maryland compared to Title I employment services. And then we also know that there just is a general need for increased collaboration between our WIOA partners. We've worked really hard on this over the years, but it's still a continuing challenge. Next slide. So one way that Maryland sought to attack this issue was through a Career Pathways grant. So in 2018, we launched a Career Pathways program. And in that, we awarded up to $250,000 per award per jurisdiction. The goal of this program was explicitly to increase Title II learner access to Title I training and career opportunities, in addition to meeting lower level adult learners where they are and supporting their career goals, as well as addressing the needs of businesses, expanding career pathway through the piloting of proven interventions, supporting the creation of a career pathways guide to promote best practices, and to help achieve sustainability after the project completion. I want to bring up the career pathways guide. So all of the information I'm presenting to you is just a very small piece of a published career pathways guide, which is publicly available. And the link is already on the Jamboard that Jesse brought up earlier. So I want to make sure that you know that that's something you can get access to after the webinar today. Next slide. So I'll start with what the outcomes were, and then I want to go into some of the projects to talk about how we, in particular, worked to address the needs of our immigrant community. For the project itself, we had a goal of serving 179 students or clients. We served 190, so we went above and beyond what our goal was for both the number of clients served, as well as a number that ended up being co-enrolled between Title I and Title II services. As far as those that completed training, we met 83% of our goals. We had more difficulty, though, when it was coming to those clients that were able to complete the training and also get the certification for which that training was designed for. We only had a 58% completion on that. But for those that did complete the training, 100% of the clients were placed into employment following the training. And then we found that in Q2 employment of those placed into employment after they exited the program, the 69% of them were still employed. So those are some of the metrics on that. And there's a little bit more about that in the guide itself. But I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the programs. So next slide. So this is a map of Maryland. We had 5 jurisdictions that had applied and received this funding, and a couple of the jurisdictions got funding in 2 cycles. There were a wide range of training areas. So certified nursing assistant, patient care tech, dental assistant, a lot of medical pathways, but also apartment maintenance technician was one of the pathways, diesel mechanic, EMT. And what I want to point out here of interest for this audience is that the majority of our programming did end up serving our English learner population. In Maryland, we find that about 60 to 65% of all of our enrolled Title II learners are ESL students, according to the NRS levels. And so that held true with the populations that were served under this grant opportunity as well, is that it was majority English learners. Next slide. So to highlight 2 jurisdictions, I want to start with Howard County. And I actually think on the webinar today, I think we have someone from Howard County on, so please feel free to correct me if I say something wrong. But what this funding did is it helped us to look at our Title I provider and our Title II provider, and in this case, providers. We have 2 Title II providers in Howard County. The Howard County Office of Workforce Development is a Title I provider, and for Title II, it was a combination of the Howard County Library System and Howard Community College. They worked together to target English language learners in particular, and they worked to help provide the supports necessary for those on a CNA track, a patient care technician track, or ophthalmic technician, which is a vision tech track. Next slide. Their method of providing this was through an IELCE IET pathway. So it's something we've already discussed a lot about. And that comes with a lot of work. This was a lot of work for this jurisdiction to do, especially because they were balancing a Title I agency and 2 separate Title II agencies to make this work. But they had a lot of, so definitely one of the most successful cohorts in the program. The Title I agency provided case management, support services, and employment placement for all of the clients that were enrolled. Both Title II providers worked to deliver sequential and concurrent courses in essential skills, career exploration, English language instruction, and the contextualized occupational training. There was a career navigator assigned at Howard Community College, one of the Title II providers. This served as the partner liaison for Title II in the partnership. And then also the Coalition of Geriatric Services was one of the employer partners that provided industry input and referred completers to employment opportunities during the program and of course upon completion of the program. So that was Howard County's way of attacking this problem. The next one is Prince George's County, Maryland. And in Prince George's County, there's one Title I provider, one Title II provider. Employ Prince George's is a Title I provider. And Prince George's Community College is our Title II provider in that jurisdiction. Also targeted English language learners. The occupational training tracks was CNA and apartment maintenance technician. Next slide. In this one, they used an IBEST model, which is a model that came out of Washington State years ago. And it's very similar in practicality to an IET model. Employ Prince George is a Title I provider coordinating the partner services, the case management, and the employment placement for all of the learners, whereas Prince George's Community College, a Title II provider, delivered cohort-based English language instruction that was contextualized occupational training and essential skills. And of important thing to note, they used a co-teaching strategy. So there were 2 instructors in the classroom. For apartment maintenance technician, participants participated in paid internships, which was a great support for them in making sure that they could continue to make money, to earn money while they were going through training. And Employ Prince George's Industry Advisory Council reviewed all the curriculum on the project, advised on the employment demand, provided on-site learning opportunities, and also assisted with placement upon completion of the program. So those were just 2 of the cohort models that came up from this grant. And I want to briefly share with you some of the lessons that we learned from this. So next slide. So a couple of things we learned, and these are in no particular order. It may seem obvious, but English learners are not a static group. So of course, everyone thinks, okay, this group has a certain need for English proficiency development, but that's where the similarities end. Everyone comes with their own background, their own history, their own educational journey, their needs as as parents, as members of their community, et cetera. And it was important that in the program design that we not lose track of the fact that this is not a static group of people to serve. A couple of things we learned is that we have to be careful about the complexity of recruitment materials. Not for these 2 that I brought up, but for one of them, they determined that the job title in itself was confusing to the potential students. So they had to make sure that it was very clear what people were signing up for so that they could make sure they generated the proper interest. Working on the difference between Title I and Title II eligibility is a continuing challenge. The eligibility requirements for Title II were a lot less. And so it's kind of a shock whenever we have learners in our adult ed classes that are going to seek services with our Title I partners to walk them through some of the eligibility requirements and documentation that's required for someone and using Title I services. Regular check-ins are an effective way to stay on top of our learners and to make sure they're getting the support that they need. Developing creative partnerships with community organizations serving the target populations is key. For one of the cohorts, there was a strong connection with the International Rescue Committee, the IRC, one of the refugee resettlement agencies. They very much helped, even though they weren't a paid partner in this grant, very helpful for making sure that we reached out to the community properly and help provide those wraparound supports for all of the learners. Making sure that we provide support for self-service activities. Another of the challenges when we're helping our English learners access what would be considered a self-service activity on Title I. So logging into our Maryland Workforce Exchange to do some other self-service things, making sure that we're providing the support for them, because what for some people might be a self-service, someone else might need some help walking through those services. And some of that came out in the classroom, some of that came out with some of the student coaches that were involved, but just making sure that that allowance was made, including building the learner confidence. Another thing that came up was being aware of unfamiliar hiring practices. So like I said, ELs are not a static group, and the hiring practices from their home country may be very different from the hiring practices in the United States. And that's where the IELCE part can really come into play, because as they're learning how to navigate American systems of government and so forth, talking about employment practices is another thing that's very helpful. And also making sure that digital literacy skills are taken into consideration in program design. That was something that many of the cohorts found was something that was missing in the original design, is making some assumptions on students' digital literacy skills. Next slide. As far as employer wins, one of the things that help with building a relationship with employers is that it's great to start with what you've already done with the employer and say, this is an employer that we know we can work with. Let's develop then this larger partnership so that we can help them get a workforce that meets their needs. Also working with employers to make sure that we understand what their goals are as an employer. We know for all of these areas that I mentioned that they have a need for staff. And sometimes working with our clients, we can help them on their gaps in skill sets. They may have DEI initiatives that they are looking to meet metrics on. They may have areas of growth in their demographics that they want to attract that they're having difficulty doing. It's a way that adult education can really help there. And also another thing is to leverage any county, city, or public employers when possible. One of the jurisdictions partnered with the city fire department, which ended up being a very useful partner to have, because then you could tie in the political will of the city to help make this work. Next slide. So I know I went through that very quickly, and it's because there's so much information in this guide, and I want to give you just a highlight of it. But if you want to read more about it, it is available online. There's a QR code for it there, the link's there, but also the link is already in the Jamboard to read it at your leisure. So thank you so much for your time. And I will go ahead and turn it over to the next person, and we have Q&A at the end, I believe.
Thank you so much, Doug. That was really great. It was so helpful to hear how Maryland is working to improve the relationship between the Title I and the Title II providers, especially in terms of the co-enrollment of English learners. So now we're going to hear a little bit from a program perspective. And as you heard from Doug, it's really important to prioritize relationships with employers. So we're going to hear from Lynn, who's going to tell us about how they've done that, prioritize those relationships to build workforce training programs that serve English learners. So Lynn, take it away.
Jesse. I was excited to see the survey where so many of you have already done some work within IETs. I think it's always a little scary at first to start. And so yay to those of you that have jumped in and made that happen, because it was a scary process for us initially, and it really has gotten better, a little bit easier. I'm going to go into the details in the next slide, but I wanted to give you an overview of the different type of companies and other organizations that we work with. But first of all, the picture, that's me on the far left in my lab coat and hard hat, well, hard plastic hat. We always like to visit the factories, which is a lot of the places that we're in, prior to developing an employer assessment, just to see what the students do on an everyday basis, and have just found that to be very useful and very eye-opening. But the first couple of companies, Assurant, Electrolux, Husky, Lee Company, Mala, or as we say in the South, Molly, McKesson, Nissan, Sumitomo, Taylor Farms, Tyson. I'm sure you recognize some of those. Those are all manufacturing companies. And in the Middle Tennessee area, and as Jesse alluded to, Nashville being the biggest of our cities across our counties, they're all manufacturing companies, and they all hire a significant number of non-native employees. And what we've quickly learned is that when you have non-native employees, they are at a much higher risk of injury, and because they don't know the language. And even though so many of these companies do provide translators, it's just not possible to have one on the floor standing beside everybody at all times. So if there's an emergency that happens, it's scary out there. And so, that's part of the passion that we bring when we speak to companies, is the importance of keeping their employees safe. And of course, if no other reason, you can look at your bottom line that makes your workman's comp go up if there's a workplace accident. But what we generally do with the manufacturing companies is visit and then sit down with them and kind of see what their needs are as we get ready to work with them. The other thing that we've discovered is that our services are wildly popular. It's not an unusual Assurant. If you have ever traded in your cell phone or your iPad, it could easily have gone to a company such as Assurant. They take those and refurbish them and then ship them out. But we had over 200 people to show up of their employees to show up for ESL classes. Same thing with Tyson and some of the others. And it was like, yeah, we're just not really going to be able to take care of that many people. I don't know about the rest of the world and country, but have a hard time finding classes or finding teachers, and then finding a location to have the classes in the manufacturing site. So we've learned some things from that. Do registration before, and then we're letting the companies pick the number of people they want in a class, and then that way we put people on a waiting list, take it by cohorts, because there's just no way we can serve that many students at any one given time. It's a little lot. And so the other companies or organizations that are on here, one is the Finishers Trade Union. And for those of you, I didn't know what a finisher was, but the folks that put in I call them windows, they call them glaziers, that put in windows in the high rises and do the finishing touches of a building. And then the other are our colleges of applied technology. And the work that we do there is, yes, with the English language learners. We're discovering that a lot of times, if they're in the LPN program, the medical terminology and the math, first of all, the medical terminology, because it's so heavy in vocabulary and English, it makes it more difficult for those students to be successful. And of course, we want to have a good healthcare system, and want to make sure we've got strong and quality nurses. So that's always near and dear to my heart as well. And the same thing with their dosage math. Math is always, whether they're an ELL student or if they're just a regular old American student, math is always a big concern. And so for those, we provide support classes that usually they'll go to their regular class, and then immediately afterwards sometimes it's in the same classroom. It sure makes it easier. They'll just transition right into our support classes. And so those are some of the things that we're doing with colleges and with trade unions. Now, how do we get there? It's a process for those of you that have done it. And so how did we get there? So next slide, please. So sometimes I do sit back and I ask myself, how did all these companies, how did we connect with all these companies? Some of them, when we go to workforce development conferences or sessions that our Tennessee Department of Labor has, we'll make connections there, we'll meet people there. And so that's usually one of the best ways that we found to make those connections. We have not been extremely successful knocking on people's doors and saying, hey, here we are. We've tried that. and haven't gotten a lot of response. A lot of those that are on there has happened word of mouth. We'll have their students in our regular classes, and then they'll go back and tell their employer, and that's sometimes how that happens. And so once we have developed that relationship and we know that we're going to offer a workplace development class, the main thing that we try to do, and not always easy, when you get educators in the room, we do like to talk, is that we ask them what their biggest needs are, and we listen. And one of the things that we always do is ask, if possible, if they could send us their employee handbook and also a list of vocabulary or safety skills that they feel like would be vitally important to improve one of their employees, their work, and also vitally improve how safe they are in the workplace environment. And so we take the information that they send us. We do that good old backwards learning. Remember that from K-12. And so we look at what the employer says that they want. We develop a workplace development assessment for them. We send it to them and say, okay, these are the things that we think we heard you say you want us to cover in our classes. And so we do some back and forth tweaking, because after all, they're our client. We want to do what's best for them, because they want to do what's best for their employees. And so once that's set, then we hand that off to our instructor and work with them in developing an ESL curriculum that meets the needs of what the employer has asked us to teach. Now, we do teach our regular ESL curriculum, how to communicate with your child's teacher, or how to communicate with your doctor, all those other activities that we normally do in a regular ESL class. But we also want to make sure that we're covering the skills that the employer has asked us to do. And then at the end of a cohort, which is usually 15 or 16 weeks, we'll test and then report the results out. The results so far, knock on wood, have all been really great. Haven't had, anybody really that bombed out or anything, because it's important to them. It conceptualizes their learning and keeps it on target. And I've listed a list. Well, that's important, of frequently requested topics. And most generally it's safety. We can't call it OSHA training because we're not OSHA certified, but we do really hit strong on the safety skills. Work specific vocabulary we have found. I don't know about the rest of you. I came from a K-12 background. I don't speak manufacturing, and so I've learned a lot here lately. But just the specific skills that are specific keywords and vocabulary that's important for them for employees to know. Digital literacy skills, that was mentioned earlier. We're seeing more and more in that. Tyson, for example, they designed their own curriculum, and our instructor went in and taught it. And it was around, you think about just in our own jobs, the apps that we use during the day. We do one to put in our time, and then maybe another one to do in our time off. And so many apps, and they were discovering that their employees were really struggling with that. Some of them, if they came from Arabic countries or other countries, they were not familiar. Okay, I'm hushing. We're not familiar with our keyboard. And so we even went as far down as teaching the keyboard. And so how do we support our learners? Relevant instruction, small classes. Jesse, do you want me to go ahead and answer the questions that are in the...
Why don't you answer them in the chat? And so then we'll because I don't think we'll have time for Q&A, and I want to make sure we get to our third presenter. So if folks have questions for Lynn, and you already have quite a few, Lynn, do you want to address them in the chat?
I'll do that. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you, Lynn. That was really helpful to hear about how your program is building these employer relationships to develop these workforce training programs. And as you can see by the number of questions, there's lots of interest in this topic. Continuing with the theme of how do we work with the workforce development system, our last speaker is going to talk about some of the strategies that they've put into place in Massachusetts to improve that coordination of services between Title I and Title II. So Derek, take it away. The rest of the time is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm sorry, I was on mute. Thank you and welcome. I'm going to talk about how, as Jesse mentioned, our Title II programs are partnering with our career centers to provide services to all Massachusetts residents, but specifically focusing on immigrants. So in Massachusetts, we have actually branded our workforce system as Mass Hire, and our career centers, our AGCs, are known as Mass Hire Career Centers. I will try to just say career centers, but we do have a branding system here in Massachusetts. Our IELCE system is actually branded as well as Mass STEP. But our adult education agencies and how do they work with career centers? So we fund here in Massachusetts, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We are responsible for administering WIOA Title II funds. And one of the services that we fund our programs to provide is what we call outstationing. And this is the practice of having an adult education staff member at a career center for a certain number of hours a week. And that staff member serves as a liaison between the career center and the local area's adult education agencies. So we have 16 local workforce areas in Massachusetts, and we have at least one, we have one adult education agency in each one that is providing outstationing services for the local area. In Boston, we have about 20 adult ed programs, and all the other areas are between 3 and 5 programs. And so the way that this works is that the Title II staff member is at the career center, and she does two things. She works with career center customers to find adult education agencies. So a customer comes to the career center, and in the process of an intake, it's determined that she would benefit from adult education services. So she is referred to the outstationing coordinator, who works with the customer to find a local adult education agency that meets her needs. And so the customer either is enrolled at the program or goes on to a waiting list, but a connection is made with one or more adult education agencies in the area. And then the second thing the outstationing coordinator does is helps to connect currently enrolled adult education students with their area's career center. And so that can take a number of forms. It can be the coordinator going out to adult education agencies and making presentations about the services that career centers offer. It can involve the coordinator leading informational trips to the career center, bringing currently enrolled adult education classes to the career center, and then just otherwise promoting career center services in the local area. And in terms of working with immigrants and refugees, we have a number of our agencies who are working with career centers to help them look at the services that they're providing through a DEI lens. And so I'll give one example. We have an agency, a great community-based organization in Western Mass known as Center for New Americans. All of their services are for immigrants and refugees. They're one of our adult education providers, and they've worked with their career center to help them make their services, their environment more welcoming to immigrants. And so they have a lot of conversations about what is the customer experience when they come to the Career Center. Starting with the tour, the presentation, follow-up. How can we make sure that we're being welcoming to all? In addition to that, when the outstationing coordinator is planning an informational trip to a Career Center, what we find works best is when the coordinator actually works with the program and actually gets information to the adult ed advisors and instructors so that teachers can do a lesson plan on visiting a Career Center. So, okay, everyone, so this week we're going to visit what's known as a Mass Hire Career Center. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's going to happen. There's going to be a tour. There's going to be a presentation. You're going to be able to ask questions. Let's talk about some vocabulary that you'll hear when you're there. And let's talk about what are some questions that you might have after listening to the presentation, so that the students are prepared for the visit and they have some idea of the services that the Career Center offers, and they'll be able to participate more fully in the tour and in the orientation and be able to ask some follow-up questions after that. And so we have this across the state in Massachusetts, and it's one way that we're trying to improve collaboration, but among WIOA core partners. As Doug mentioned in his presentation, we are trying to strengthen the collaborations among WIOA partners in the state. We think that we are undercounting the number of shared customers that we have in Massachusetts, specifically here between adult education and Career Center customers. And so outstationing is a strategy for us to address that, and making sure that customers that come to a Career Center knows that there are adult education services available to them, and that currently enrolled adult education students can access the Career Center and take advantage of the services that they offer. So that, I think, brings me to the end. And Jesse, I will turn it back to you. And like the other presenters, I'm happy to answer questions in the chat or right here as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. That was super helpful to hear about how you're running that in Massachusetts. And yes, our presenters have been doing a great job of answering questions in the chat. So if folks have questions, please pop them in there for Derek. We only have a few minutes left, so I did just want to remind folks that we do have these next 2 webinars coming up over the next 2 weeks. We'll put the links in the chat if you haven't yet registered for those. Just like we did today, we're going to be doing a deeper dive into effective strategies for supporting civic integration and then for supporting linguistic integration through multilingual approaches. So hope you can join us for those next week and the week after. And then finally, we do encourage you, go ahead to the next slide, John. We do encourage you to take a look at that Jamboard. We've got it populated with lots of resources, both from EARN and other places in the field. The Career Pathways report that Doug mentioned is there already, and hopefully some of your colleagues have also added some as well. I also just wanted to make a pitch and let you know that this fall, the EARN project will be releasing a spotlight on supporting the economic integration of adult learners with emerging literacy skills. These learners are sometimes known as LESLA learners. And I wanted to mention that today because it's specifically focused on what are the things that we can be doing with this population around supporting their economic integration, because we know that they often also need to be working and it's not something that they can afford to wait on. So I just wanted to thank everybody so much for joining us, for your participation today. I learned a lot about some effective practices going on around the country, and I hope you did too. Please, we can stay on for a few minutes if you want to add your questions into the chat, and I can make sure to route them to the presenters to get you responses. So thank you all so much for joining us, and hopefully you can join us next week. Have a great day.